I said to myself, you know what? You stick to who you are. You be kind, stay humble. Um, and it was just a good example. So anytime I work with an actor that could be difficult or not the nicest person in the world, I just think about Al and I go, listen, this guy is a kind person. You need to learn from him.
So so now you're getting your rhythm, and during this period, when does stand up factor back in?
So I think stand up was always present throughout.
Okay.
That's the one thing that kept me busy. I didn't think about the phone not ringing because I always stayed busy with stand up. I was always in the club at least 3 or 4 times a week. I was out there doing really late shows sometimes, and so it kept me busy, kept me fresh. So when auditions did come up, it was kind of like theater, kept you active, your body active. So when you walked into that audition, it didn't feel like you had to kind of dust yourself off a little bit if there were big gaps in between one audition to the other.
And and during that time, did you find a mentor?
I it's interesting. I didn't have like one mentor, somebody who like took me under their wing, that I kind of listened to. I learned from so many different comedians or people around me. Sometimes I learned from people that weren't so nice to me. I learned like what I didn't want to do or who I was not. You
Which
know,
is just as important, right? It's just as important. Sometimes that's even more important.
yeah. And so that helped me a lot. And then there were also too sometimes, I found myself in circles where I don't know if it was as productive of a circle, but it wasn't. It was just I was just basically just working with what I had, right? So platforms presented themselves, and I was in this environment. Sometimes they were great, sometimes not so great. But I think overall, everything at that time served as a mentor for me.
And then you came to Los Angeles to pursue your stand up.
Well, I had visited LA at first from time to time. Like I would come out for pilot season
Oh, okay.
and I would stay, but I was still in New York. And then in 2012, I had decided, my wife and I decided we were going to move to LA. Um, she was okay with, making that move and saying, okay, look, trying to like elevate myself in my career. And we are like, all right. I had a buddy of mine who's been a buddy of mine since college, and he said, if you come out to LA, I feel like they're gonna celebrate your successes. I feel like you're gonna be stuck doing the same thing, staying in New York. And I said, well, maybe it's not a bad idea. And came out there, and literally, I went out to LA 2 weeks later. My wife stayed behind because I was gonna set up shop, and she called me. And she's like, I'm feeling anxious. And I was like, well, what's up? Are you okay? And she basically shared with me that she was pregnant.
Oh, wow.
We had celebrated me moving to LA and my
You
daughter's
left her
firstborn.
something. You left her a package.
I was just trying to leave a little something behind just to make sure she wasn't lonely. And and then she starts to cry and she's like, oh, this is, I messed this up for you. I messed up this opportunity. And I said, yeah, because it takes one person to make a baby. I said, you didn't mess up anything. This is life. This is number one. This is
Yes.
the important stuff. What we do doesn't define us. This is where it's at. So I was clear that I was not going to stay in LA. I stayed in LA for about 7 months and then I came back to New York. So I had a little time, but every 2 weeks I was basically flying back to New York
Wow.
to be with her for all the doctor's appointments. And at that time, for some reason, flights were decent enough that I could do that. And I think it was the first time I gained enough points where I actually earned like two free flights. I had never done that before, so that was cool. So I definitely used them.
And what was your experience in LA? Because even though you you had a family back in New York, you were pursuing the you were surveying the lay of the land and trying to figure out if this might be a fit.
It was so different in terms of rhythm. Like even just going to an audition, the energy, the I want to say the people, but it's probably more so because I don't know them. So I don't
Right.
want to say that that had anything to do with who they are. But it was different. I had to get used to the process. Even commercial auditions felt different. They didn't feel like as warm to me as in New York. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like I knew everybody and the spaces are smaller and
Right.
you're kind of just stuck with each other and you have to make friends and so you know everybody. Um, but in LA that was different. The one thing that I did enjoy was the quality of life was different than New York. I thought that I could in the days were longer. I felt like I enjoyed the energy of the day. In New York, everything happens so fast that you don't get a chance to breathe sometimes. And so that experience was great. Um, and I found myself doing what I did in New York and LA, which is where like I would get very invested in the characters. Like I would show up as the character. I wasn't playing. You know, if you say the guy's a scientist, well, you're gonna get a scientist to show up, and I might have little things in my pocket that I'm gonna use. You know, basic things that I'm gonna use in the scene. And some casting directors, not all of them, but some would look at me and go, "Oh, you don't have to wear that jacket. You don't have to wear those gloves." And I said, I just for me, I was just so used to committing all the way, and that was different. That it sometimes it didn't seem like that was that important, and that was
Yeah.
fine.
They just want the flavor.
I
They
want the
they're not, they just want the flavor. It's a whole different thing, and then you get different conversations about it because you'll have somebody say, "Oh yeah, come dressed up," and then you're the only one that comes dressed up, and everybody's looking at you like, "What's wrong with that person?" And then sometimes they say, "No, just go dressed as yourself," and you go in and everybody's in the jacket. Everybody's like, what is happening? So,
I tell you
that's LA. That's LA.
I tell you what, before I moved to LA, I had a situation where I had auditioned for a pilot in New York. They loved what I did. I must have auditioned 3 times in New York, and they were like, okay, we're going to fly him out. We're going to test him for this pilot. I came out, but my thing was if I'm coming from New York, I'm not playing around. I'm not treating this again like it's just a regular audition or maybe I'm taking it for granted. So again, I show up as the character, but they already know because I'm using the same thing I used in New York. It's not like I went out and bought I'm not looking like a starship, like a trooper from Star Wars. I'm just it's what I was wearing before. Anyways, I show up and I remember the guy it was just 3 of us, but the third guy wasn't there yet. And I show up and the guy was just he looks at me from head to toe. He's just like, wow. He's like, you're prepared. And he had like his script in his hand, and I'm thinking, this we're testing for a pilot, man. What are you doing holding that script? And I just looked at them and I said, yes, I am. And in my mind, I was like, I've traveled 3,000 miles. I gotta give myself a shot.
That's right. That's right.
And I ended up booking that pilot,
That's well.
which by the way was a job I only had for 6 days, and then I was let go, which is
uh,
what you were saying earlier.
that
You always,
happened to me. I mean, I've had that happen to me twice.
uh,
On one, it was a pilot with a known comic, and he didn't like anybody. So people were getting fired every day off that pilot. Every day people were in. We kept having readings because they kept bringing in new people, and I would sit, I would watch. I was like, I do my stuff, and then and this should have shot like 7 days. We were now on the 14th day,
hmm.
and then all of a sudden he zoned in on me, and I was like, okay. So he starts. He says her lines are funnier than mine. So
Oh
then there was a rewrite. Bring in so we do the lines, and then he says I was behind a desk. He said her desk is too big. So then the prop department to mess with him put me in a little preschool table with a little
oh,
preschool chair. And everybody laughed. They thought it was so funny, and I'm still delivering the lines. And he was like,
that's funny.
she is funnier than I am. And
Oh,
at that moment, I was like, I'm done. And I remember going to my car, and this is where when you had your beeper, you didn't have a cell phone
Oh
yet.
yeah.
So I got the
Oh yeah.
beeper, and when I saw the number, I said, "Uh oh, it's casting. I'm out of here." So I went home. I called, and the casting director who had booked me on some other parts, he said, "I am so sorry." I said, "Nope, you don't have to tell me. I already know. I said, don't even worry about it. Don't even worry." So it's that thing that you have. But by that point, I had already been fired off of another job, which was devastating to me. The first one, because you don't expect it. You come in there, you're prepared, and just like what you said, you're given. When I had read, there was the scene was fantastic. But when I got on set and we did the table read, I had one line that made no sense at all. And I kept trying to figure out how to make that line funny. I was like, okay, there's got, and I kept like trying. It wasn't a funny line. It made no sense. And about the fourth day, and we are now in rehearsals, and I'm still delivering that line. And I went home that night, and the agent called and said, "You don't have to go back tomorrow." I said, "Well, but my stuff is there." He said, "Well, they'll have it at the gate for you."
Oh,
They'll have it at the gate.
they couldn't even bring it to you. No one
And
could deliver.
I was devastated. I cried. I said, "I've never been fired off of anything ever in my life. I'm the one that leaves. I've never been fired." And so, and then it took me a month to lick my wounds. So, but that's something they don't, again, they don't tell you.
It's true. It's true. Before that job, um, I had another one that I was really excited about, and I had been to like three different rehearsals for it. It was with a really big director, a big star, and at some point, the director just didn't like what I was doing with it, or he didn't find it funny or something, or it just they kept changing the script, and then finally I got the call that they still paid me for my time, but
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
not the
about the
same.
money. It's not the same. You're looking forward to the opportunity to work with people you admire, and so that was tough. That was really tough to feel that, and then literally like 2 months later, this pilot thing comes up, and similar to like your story, the star of it, I would have been his basically sidekick. I was like his number two, and the thing was he wanted to hire his friend to be the guy, and he was fighting it. But the network was they would say we can't hire your friend, like we have to hire an actor. And he kept fighting it and fighting it and fighting it to the point that they just kind of went his route. But it turns out, and obviously I never wish anything bad for anyone. I appreciated the opportunity, because even though I had the job for 6 days, I can't tell you how much I learned from it. um, but apparently the show never worked out. Literally the set was like falling apart. The guy's energy wasn't the greatest, and I guess it did what it had to do on its own.
That same thing over on this end. That show
Oh
didn't
yeah.
work out either.
Oh, there
So
we go.
it's lovely. I'm not wishing anybody well, but it's lovely. That's all I have to say. So let's talk about some of the people that you have worked with that you really not only took away stuff from that experience, but you have actually been able to share it in your teaching.
Hmm. It's interesting. The first person that comes to mind, there are two people that come to mind when I think about actors I've worked with that I've walked away with something. It's I can't I feel bad because the first one I can't remember her name, but she played Mrs. Doolittle in Eddie Murphy's Doctor Doolittle. She
Okay.
played his wife, and I was literally just this was early on in my career. I was a background actor in a movie. I was just in the background, an extra, and she was so kind to me. She was so kind to me, and she had this really great conversation with me and asked me if I wanted some water, brought me some water. And I saw, this is so sweet. Like, you don't have to do this. I mean, you're the star of this movie. And she said, she made it clear to me that we are human beings and we should be kind to each other. And that was very early on, that I always tell people, be kind to each other, and you should not treat people differently because you're here or there, you're up there or down here. It's not about that. Um, the second person that stands out to me is Al Pacino. I worked with Al Pacino briefly in this film called The Humbling, where I played a security guard and I wouldn't let him into the theater. And he had to perform this Shakespeare play. It was a part of a nightmare sequence. But what happened with that project was that Barry Levinson is the director, and he's like, "All right, let's rehearse," you know. And I was like, "All right," but no one introduced me to Al. Like usually they introduce you to the actors beforehand, and no one introduced me to him. We just started this rehearsal, and I see this little guy coming from far away. I was like, "I wonder if that's Al Pacino." He's not as tall. I mean, I had heard he wasn't the tallest guy in the world, but I mean, neither am I. You know, it's not like much taller than him. But I see him coming. We did the scene. Barry comes over. He goes, "I liked it. Let's shoot that." And I was like, "Great." Um, we did a couple of takes the way it was written, and then we did a couple versions or a few versions of it improvised. He was like, "Hey, Al's gonna say something, and you say something. And Al says something, and so on and so on." I'm like, "I'm gonna improv with Al Pacino. Sure, let's do it." And so, one thing that I loved about Al was that I never once felt that he showed up with ego and pride. He showed up to the set to work as if it was the very first acting gig he ever got. And I had met other actors that had not been in the business that long, and they weren't so kind. You know, they had their stuff. But this man, who, you know, you could think that he might be this kind of person. He was not. So kind. And I said to myself, you know what? You stick to who you are. You be kind, stay humble. Um, and it was just a good example. So anytime I work with an actor that could be difficult or not the nicest person in the world, I just think about Al and I go, listen, this guy is a kind person. You need to learn from him.
Yeah, unfortunately, you have a lot of broken actors out there who take their job a little too seriously and don't realize that there's balance.